Hi, my name is Colin Davidson. I'm one of the staff of the Handmade Network, bringing you our regular show, Unwind. It's every third Saturday of the month. So today we have a special guest, Meghan, who's been a contributor in the Handmade community for 3 or 4 years at least, talking about WaffleGit, WaffleAuth, and a few other really cool things.
Hi, yeah. I'm Megan. I'm very happy to be here. I'm here to talk about my project Waffle Co. Been working on it for the past little bit. It's my big project I've been working on in Zig for a while. So, title, what is it? Where are we going? Or how do we take back the distributed web? Or how I started working on a chat app and I ended up working on a Git host and auth identity provider instead. So chat apps are classic, but how did I end up on a Git host? You know, this has a few different answers. We use Git and GitHub and various other hosts every single day. I check my GitHub notifications maybe almost as often as my phone, maybe even more because I try to use my phone not that much. But these tools always feel like a compromise, and for something we use so often, I feel like we should really love it. Um, So who am I? As we just said, my name's Megan. You'll commonly find me online under the handle Nectro. I'm an enthusiast for user experience, performance, and Zig. I've been with Handmade since September of 2021. I've been doing web development for the better part of the last decade, and professionally for about the last three. Currently, I'm with Bun. So if you, or which is a JavaScript runtime package manager, bundler, test runner all in one. So if you like C, C++, Zig, or TypeScript, definitely check us out. We're hiring. Um, cool. So when it comes to making a Git host or using one, what are we looking for? We want it to be fast. We want the pages to load in a short amount of time. We want it, and a big part of that on the web these days is, we want it to have, the less JavaScript you can use is also a big factor in, load performance. We want a simple but powerful, interface. We want the data that we're looking for to be right at our fingertips, but also when we want to do something deeper, we also want that to be possible. And then self-hostable is nice. It's not a requirement. Having a hosted, alternative is also a perk for a lot of people, and that should be, straightforward to do if it's available. So with these requirements, it should be easy, right? Um, so why not GitHub? GitHub, I've been on GitHub since 2015, 2016, but I kind of have like a love-hate relationship with it. Um, Stuff like issues and actions leaves a lot to be desired. It's a very heavy app, built on Ruby and Rails. The company itself was recently acquired by Microsoft, and it has made like a huge pivot to AI. Um, and it's a single mono application that owns all our data. Um, some other options, Git um, is like too much of a GitHub clone, for the things I wanted out of a new app. Um, Although, I mean, being a GitHub clone leaves it, gets a lot of good features, but it also inherits a lot of its faults. Um, GitLab is self-hostable, but they have this open core model that I'm not the biggest fan of. The UI feels not really designed for developers, and the company behind it also recently did a massive AI pivot. SourceSite is probably, my favorite option so far, but doing project management with it requires individually registering uh, your product or your project on like 3 or 4 separate applications. PRs and patches are mostly email lists. And the self-hosting story, I've heard from a lot of people that it's like very difficult to do. And then there's a bunch of other apps that are nice, but they kind of maybe they only do one thing, or if they have good ideas, we can use them as inspiration, but they're not like full alternatives. So with that, I ended up, there was a whole bunch of other projects that I considered, but I kept having, the making a Git tool was, kept calling me. I really love working on infrastructure projects. So this is kind of how I came upon WaffleGit. This is a quick little screenshot of our homepage. You get your project list with everything right there. You get your classic, README right on the front page of a project. And this supports like a couple different formats. And all of these pages are fully server rendered with little to no JavaScript. We got branches, your various logs, which includes labels for the branches and tags that any of these commits might lie on, as well as a quick overview on the amount of files and lines that changed. We also have a tree view, which has support for like all of Git's native file types, which might be, files, folders, submodules, symlinks. However, one thing you'll notice is that a very common feature that's kind of come up in a lot of Git hosts these days is you'll have this line where it has the most recent commit that affected a particular file or folder. Now on GitHub, this is pulled with JavaScript after page load as like a separate request. So if you disable JavaScript in your browser, none of the commits, the commit messages for files will load. And as a matter of building this, I ran into a potential reason for why they might have done it this way. And that's because if you have a tree with a bunch of files that are very old, and you do it in this kind of naive way, you might end up having the tree load in a very slow manner, because the way you query Git for this commit message, because it's not built into like the underlying data layer or like the Git storage format. So when you query Git for the most recent commit that affected a file, it has to like walk down the commit log. But if you have entries that like are very old, then it kind of has to do this over and over again, which takes a long time. So I'm actually in the process of rewriting this so that way you can query the whole list of files at once and it doesn't have to unwind any of its progress down the commit log. And I wanted to, I realized GitHub might be caching this. It might, query the commit log and then kind of cache it. But I wanted to try and improve the performance of it inherently and like not just band-aid it by caching. We also have a tree view, as you would expect. And like I said, this is all server rendered. When I was comparing this with GitHub, I mentioned this in my other slide. When you disable JavaScript in your browser, you actually can view folders on GitHub, but if you click on an individual file, it doesn't load at all. So this is a nice thing. And then, like I said earlier, this is all like fully server rendered, including the like being able to click on specific lines, which uses like page hashes, so it interacts with your browser as you would expect. We get a nice commit log as you would expect, and then you get like an overview like per file. This kind of went on a journey because I found I learned a lot about Git, particularly with regards to how Git stores things, and like some of the amount of verification it does over things. Like one of the most recent that I discovered was that Git doesn't actually verify your email as an email, and it also does a lot. For some who might be familiar with different RFCs and whatnot, this kind of name and then angle bracket email is like a very common RFC for like email addresses. However, it's not exactly that, because on one hand, it doesn't validate that inside the angle brackets is an email, or like kind of looks like an email, which is just like the username at like other domain kind of looking string. It just like forbids you to have angle brackets in either field. Um, and then I also, through this process, learned that you can have, when you have merge commits, um, on this commit, you don't see it, but when you have a merge commit, um, the body of that commit will have two parents listed, and one parent will be the most recent commit on the branch that it was merged from, and then the other parent will be the commit that it was merged to. But you can also merge multiple branches at the same time. I remember when I was running through a bunch of test repos, which I got from this slide. You can see all the repos that I downloaded for testing. And there's one in the Linux kernel that has 66 parents, uh, which was a real surprise. The Linux kernel also has a feature that exercises the fact that you can have like commits in a Git repo, since it's just like a content address file system, basically. Commits don't all have to stem from like a single, like init, like root commit, if you will. You can have branches in parallel that aren't accessible from each other. And then you can also have empty commits, which was like another whirlwind. But getting back to the kind of full application, one thing you might note about the columns here is that for a bunch of the ones at the top, they don't have anything listed in the owner column. And that's because WaffleGit makes a distinction between mirrors and like owned repositories, to really simplify the workflow around that. So like mirrors will update on their own, and then owned repos are only updated when you push them. Another big feature that I wanted with WaffleGit is like a much more granular permission system. And so you can have repos that are public. You can have repos that are public but aren't listed on the front page. And then you can also have repos that are private. And I'll get into more about that in a second. And then, what was I saying? Okay, yeah. And another big thing that I wanted was the all-in-one project management that many of us are familiar with. And as you might notice here, is that this project has an issue board and a public README, but all of the like Git UI tabs that were there before are now missing. And it's not because this project isn't a Git repo, but it's because you can also individually set the permission on being able to access the Git UI and being able to access issues. So you can have a closed source project while also allowing the public or anyone with an account able to submit issues and get, interact with them and get status updates on them. This is an individual issue page. This one's a little bit different because I'm in the process of doing a bit of a redesign. I wanted to show this before I moved on. So I have a lot implemented, but I have a lot more to go. I have more stuff with issues. I really like the feature from Bugzilla and many others I've seen where you can have issues block other ones, which is I found a really nice way to merge or manage issues and then sub-issues. Being able to have private issues, I've always found that it's a little that when you want to submit a security vulnerability for a project, it's usually on a different platform or only through email. And so being able to have private issues would allow you to keep those in a single spot. Another thing that I had thought of, but then also saw implemented in GitLab was this idea of grouped labels. So people, bigger projects will kind of do this thing on GitHub, kind of trying to shim this idea where, maybe you have a label for, the architecture or the operating system or the component of a project that this particular issue affects. And grouping them makes it a much more ingrained experience. And then like an option, and then the other thing here was an option to auto lock issues after it's been closed with no new comments. Helps keep turning down a lot. I want to make sure there's a ton of observability because this will be trivially self-hostable. I'm going to have like a Docker container that'll be fully documented and whatnot. So tons of Prometheus endpoints, all of the granular permissions I mentioned before, and also stuff like user groups. So you can easily give, you don't have to manually add, each person to a thing if you have like a lot of people on your instance. And then I think there's a lot I want to explore with the patches and PR process. I want to get back to making it patch focused rather than maybe branch focused and whatnot. Since this is like not a single mono app, there won't be the idea of forks because you won't, if you like log into somebody else's instance, you wouldn't necessarily have push access on like their instance. So that's like another area I want to explore. Having RSS feeds for commit logs, notifications, and then integration with another thing I'm going to talk on in a minute. And then also I want to, for the CI, I want to integrate well with other services. But if we were ever to roll our own, I've always wanted to do this thing, and I've kind of proof of concepted it out before. But I want to do this thing where you have like KVM, so you can have much better OS support and have status checks integrate with Git notes so that it's a much more less lock-in for that integration. But as I briefly mentioned, the kind of process model with this is instead of it being a single mono app, each user would kind of have their own instance. But, we still want that connection because, the social effect and then also things like notifications, being able to have those in a single spot is really nice. And I would like to not lose that if we can. So one of the ways that I'm kind of counteracting that is by also building a Waffle identity. That's going to be a hosted service. I at the start so that you can maintain a shared presence across instances. This will also stop the problem of like, if I have the name Nectro on one instance, or Colin has Cloyne on, one instance, and then, somebody else logs on to another one, they can't take that name. And so that way when you see that name, you know who you're talking to. However, the Git app that I've been talking about isn't locked into identity, and identity is going to work with any auth to enable that. Another reason I wanted to make this was because like a lot of auth to identity providers that you would typically use, a lot of users worry about permission creep, not having to worry about implementing passwords in your web app is always nice. But when, as a user, when you come into a new application, it's very natural to be worried that like you don't want to give them access to like, your entire Google account or your entire, Facebook account or whatnot. So this is like a very slimmed down, it's only identity. However, we can also centralize user control features like managing permissions on a per app basis, notifications, invite codes, user groups, moderation, and whatnot. And then this one is much, much more security focused, given the sensitivity of what it's doing. So there's zero JavaScript at all. And then it has like a super like server enforced, very strict same origin only content security policy. This is a super brief little overview so far of like what the profile looks like. Very easy access to the different connections that you've made and like authorizations with the apps that you've logged into. And then making new applications is also right there. For making sure that this is sustainable, I also plan on starting an LLC for this. The Git product will be fully free for personal use with no feature locks. It'll be trivially self-hostable, and all the documentation will be public, but it'll be paid for businesses. And then, there might also be managed hosting for easy onboarding, and, anybody that doesn't want to be a sysadmin in their free time. There's a lot of paperwork and necessary stuff in the background. So I hope to announce that later this year. There's a lot of stuff with starting a business, both in, figuring out the forms you need to fill, I've been collecting stuff for like setting up newsletters and emails, bank accounts, taxes, and whatnot. Even wanting to set up a business and like, how do you run a business from your apartment when you don't want to, have that, the business of the address be at your apartment, both from a want and then also, a need, because it might not, be part of your lease and whatnot. But we'll get there. And then, yeah, I'm available on Twitter and Mastodon. I hang out in the Handmade Network and Zig Discords very regularly. And then, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I have a live demo available, but I didn't like put a specific slide for it in case anybody wanted me to go over a specific thing.
Sweet. That's awesome. Thank you, Meghan. So I've got a pile of questions because this was really, really cool. So you mentioned briefly in there that you spent some time on private issues, trying to kind of nail down that extra edge case. We recently had the whole. That's a great question. Yeah. So when we recently had the whole XC thing, we've had a bunch of security issues over the years. Having a channel for those is huge. So you spent some time thinking about private issues. Is that just a special tag? Do those go as like a DM to the user? What's your thoughts there?
No, so those would, what I'm envisioning for those is that like those would get like a regular issue number,
Okay.
but um, they would be only accessible to like the person who submitted it, and then like maintainers of the project and
Hmm.
instance admins.
Okay.
And then you could also like if there was somebody else, if the person that submitted the issue, like say for instance, worked with somebody else, you could also like invite people into it. But if somebody
Sure.
like the visibility status um, would be like part of the issue.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
and then so like you could make it public um, like as an action in the same way like you could add a label.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. And it's useful to, I guess, be able to make it public after the issue's been resolved, so people know, hey, there's been a security issue that's been fixed. It's time to update, right?
right. And then anybody else trying to go to that page, like even if they had, like even if they knew the number for it,
Hmm.
um, directly accessing that URL would still like
Right. Yeah. Doing
either
permissions checking.
404 or
Right.
I think 401, 402 is one of the um, permission denied things.
Right.
Um,
So, do you have a site or a place that people can follow the project? Is it on like GitHub, or how does that work right now?
I was thinking about this morning where I was like, I was thinking of the call to action and I was like, oh man, I should have had that newsletter. We were just talking about that in, I think, business dev the other
Mm.
day on the Handmade server. Um,
Well, no worries. We can always ping
but
it in
yeah,
the chat later. But definitely do that because that's something people will, I'm sure, want to chase after.
yeah.
Um,
At the moment, I'd recommend following me on Twitter or Mastodon or joining the Handmade Discord.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'll definitely get that set up as it gets closer.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a good question from BYP. Was there a particular big thing that you really didn't like with GitHub or GitLab that said, okay, I've got to write my own?
Um, I think I think there was like a bunch of paper cuts,
Okay.
over using it for so many years.
Hmm.
Um, and then the acquisition made me nervous. But like a lot of the part, for the most part, like that had not really affected it much or like improved things.
The Microsoft
Um,
acquisition?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then the pivot to AI was like the real kind of like, getting me over the hump to get
Hmm.
to start working on it.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, they started doing some strange things with like, oh yes, if it's in a public repo, we're gonna use it for training. What was it, Copilot? Okay. Um, so Skytress has a good one here as well. Asking about dark files. So have you played with things other than Git? I know there's like, what's it, Pidgel. There's SVN. Is there something that you like specifically about Git that made you go, oh, man, I'm definitely going down the Git route?
Um, a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I've read up a little bit on Mercurial. I also kind of caught wind of Facebook and Meta recently came out with like a custom fork of Mercurial that they called Sapling,
Hmm.
which I read a lot about. Um, I've heard of Fossil, which is a custom thing that the SQLite team uses,
Hmm.
which is like even more all in one than what I planned for a WaffleGit.
Yep.
Um, and then yeah, Pygel I've heard of.
Yeah.
Um, I went with Git partly because I'm so familiar with it. I like
Sure.
the underlying data model,
Hmm.
and then also like the ubiquity of its use. Um, I think is really nice.
Mm. Yes, there's a lot of Git users
Um,
out there. It's a big market.
there's so many like when it comes to software development, there's so many questions and answers that we have to ask ourselves as developers. When it comes to starting a project,
Hmm.
and I'm glad that for the most part, the process of getting code is mostly a solved problem.
Right.
Obviously, there's people. Well, the wording of that, like we're still improving Git, But as far as like the fact that you don't really have to ask yourself, like, oh, just git clone URL, and kind of, it's like, one of those tools that just everyone has.
Well, I've had experience with
I think,
SVN more recently, and Git clone is so much nicer than the SVN clone. It takes so much less time. Right?
oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. And the other issue that I've run into, Git bisect is very nice. I use it frequently, and SVN doesn't support it. So things like digging into issues have, okay, Git's interface isn't the most amazing, but it does have some really nice tools in that toolbox.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Git bisect is awesome. I feel like I said this thing like just last night, whereas like I feel like the better you get at Git, the more magical it feels.
Okay.
Because both its awesomeness and its frustration comes from like how simple it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it only knows about blobs, which is kind of its data, and then everything on top of that, even at that lowest level, like trees,
Mm-hmm.
commits, tags, are basically just pointers to blobs and
Right.
pointers,
Yeah.
or like collections of pointers to blobs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they're all based on like hashes of that content,
Yeah.
um, which makes like storage and optimization of that storage very, um, quick and performant,
Mm-hmm.
but also like simple user stories that you would think are very simple become very hard to do.
Okay.
Like, when I'm working on a new feature, a very common, thing that I'll do is I'll like build almost all of it out, or at least like the particular chunk that I want to do in that moment. And then I'll like get it to a working state, and then I'll commit once I'm done. Um, but then, if I get to the end of making those commits and then I find like a little hunk that I'm like, oh, I wish that had been a part of like 4 commits down, or like I wish
Right.
I could edit that message. Um, that's not very easy to do in most Git clients, because it requires um, doing an interactive rebase
Right.
and recalculating the hashes of all of the commits from the one
Oh
that
yeah.
you wanted to edit and like back to where your head is. Um,
Yeah. It gets
so
hairy,
yeah,
but it's more of a client problem than it is a data model problem, I believe.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Um, yeah, I like BYP's idea here. Algorithms, data structures course. Oops, all Git edition. Yeah, you can really like poke quite a lot of the CS space just by digging through Git. Oh man. So let's see. So you had some really interesting thoughts on. Um, you did some really interesting digging into some of Git internals. I think we talked about it a little while ago, but there's something about like octopus merges. So you found some weird edge cases while getting WaffleGit to run. You want to talk a little about this?
Yeah, so I can actually hop over to my little code here. Um,
Can you blow up the font size just
so
a
I
little bit?
have
It's a
this
little small.
little catalog of like commits that cause Git to WaffleGit to crash.
Megan, can you blow up the font
Um,
size just a little bit?
yeah,
Thanks.
how's that?
A little more probably. There you go.
Okay. So not all of these made WaffleGit crash as I'm reading it over, but I wanted to have some good coverage, and I'm making more tests to cover that even more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have one. Yeah, so the Linux kernel has one commit with 66 parents.
Wow, that's a lot.
Um, yeah.
That's not really an
Uh,
octopus merge unless you have octopus with 66 limbs, but
yeah. We have one where somebody only added a file, where they only renamed a file.
Mhm.
Um, one where there was no new line.
Mhm.
There was one in here they uh, they only delete an empty file.
Hmm.
Was one. Usernames with Unicode, like unit, like
Is that a Unicode
different
author
Unicode
name?
characters in the author name.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was one that I just found recently where like the commit had an invalid email.
Oh yeah, and you got into some weird
I
stuff on the email side, right?
yeah,
So Git does something funky with its emails.
I can actually open this up for us. All the parents.
Oh yeah,
And
this
then
is
it just keeps going.
the big merge.
Yep.
Oh man. I mean, I'm sure whoever did that had a fun day merging those things.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So you said something about weird email validation on the Git side, didn't you?
Yeah, so I originally I pull this up.
Oh, and I totally forgot to mention, you
Uh,
said you were doing WaffleGit in Zig, which is a language made by somebody who has been a good friend of the community for a long time, Andrew Kelly. They're working with a bunch of other neat projects. Totally check them out.
yeah, definitely. No, making this in Zig has been awesome. Um, Zig, I feel like, it's low level, it's fast, but it also, I get so much. I like both get the the freedom to write
Hmm.
whatever I want. Like I feel like it's so, when I'm trying to serialize my thoughts into code, Zig is like fully able to accommodate that.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's both, but it also um, leads you in such a good direction,
Okay.
um, you know, with the abstractions and the interfaces you're able to build up.
Right.
And then, the fact that it um, has so many good defaults and,
Yeah.
compilers and semantics, like it instills a lot of confidence
Hmm.
when I'm building things.
Nice. So we were talking about weird edge cases with email. What sort of horrifying things have you found?
Oh yeah, so this is what I was saying before. So I originally, here's an example of uh, like a line that might be part of like a commit file.
Hmm.
And my documentation comment is documenting my assumption that this right here,
Hmm.
up until the modification time, is under the particular form of this thing called RFC 5322, which
Hmm.
is commonly used in email.
Okay.
But Git, as I discovered through this commit right here, doesn't actually follow this at all.
Okay.
So under this RFC, if the username field has a character that's like an angle bracket or like the @ sign or something like that,
Hmm.
what will happen is that it will wrap this in quotes uh, and then have the email address as normal. And then also this will have to match some pattern of like username at domain name.
Sure. Yep.
Having this @ symbol in the middle is actually like part of the spec.
Okay.
However, Git doesn't enforce that at all. Um, you can put whatever you want. Um, if you set your user.email in your Git config to something with angle brackets in it, whether that actually be like the user.name or the user.email config options, it just strips angle brackets um,
Hmm. Okay.
and then puts it right there. Um, you can have spaces, and it will uh, put it right there. It won't complain.
Okay. That sounds like a fun one to play with someday when I'm like, oh, I want to try setting up my Git user email and see what GitHub does to me or GitLab or. There's a bunch of interesting testing to do there. Fascinating. Okay. So you've got some weird edge cases here. The I don't even know what the right word is for that. It's not an octopus merge. It's not an 8-way merge. It's like a 66-way merge. I'm sure there's a word for it, but wild level merges, and a bunch of other odd edge cases. It sounds like there are more weird things to deal with than you'd expect.
Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot more about Git than
Yeah.
I ever thought I was going to, when I first started
Well, that's
programming.
how every project works. Oh, here we go. I don't even want to begin to pronounce that. um, let's see. But there was another piece that you talked about. I think you might have mentioned it a little bit in this presentation, but the identity server side of things. Um, so you had some ideas about kind of cleaning up identity servers and giving them kind of single responsibility. And you said that that was already integrated into WaffleGit.
Yeah, so I can show here, if I scroll back up from our 66 merge, I can come back to our homepage. And then you'll notice here, get this login button. I had looked into Federation, but I don't think that was the route that I wanted to go down for this.
Okay.
So for now, you'll see that my URL right here is get0.localhost. This is all like locally managed for testing.
Sure. Yeah.
So I can log in here. This will redirect me to identity.localhost. I can log in with one of my local accounts. Hit submit. You get your classic authorization page. I want to add a note here about like when you've logged into an account or when you've logged into an application before, have a note for whether or not they've changed their permissions since you last logged in.
Okay.
Whether that's different or hasn't changed. The behavior here I've noticed is actually very different between different OAuth 2 identity providers.
Okay.
GitHub itself can be an OAuth 2 identity provider.
Right. I've seen that. Yeah.
And if you log into an app that you've already authorized, it just redirects you without like prompting you with this page at all. But it will still send you an email that like a new app has authorized your account. And then different ones like Google, I'm pretty sure will like always show this page.
Right.
Yeah, like I said, I think I always want to show this page just so it doesn't, you don't feel like when the browser is redirecting you around, you don't feel like, jerked around until you get back to your app.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I do want to have like a note to the user about like clarifying whether or not permissions have changed.
Right. Okay.
But carrying on, we can hit authorize, and then we get redirected back to get0.localhost, and we get prompts for making a new repo, which has those public, unlisted, and private options
Right.
I mentioned in the slides. We have a settings page for creating personal access tokens, so you can push.
Right. That makes sense. Yep.
For ease of deployment, I can bring up another detail here. For ease of deployment, I wanted to make it so that you could push through HTTP instead of through SSH.
Okay.
And you can. You generate one of these personal access tokens, and then you use that as your password instead of your password, because WaffleGit doesn't know your password since it's all managed through the OAuth.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
And then as we see here, if I click on Waffle, since I am the repository owner, all of those Git sections are back.
Right.
Even though when I was logged out, they're not. Okay. Open up
That's
a
a
little
good
private
question,
tab.
actually. Yeah, I think you were talking about supporting this at some point. Committing via mail. One of the viewers is asking about mail committing, or probably like patch chains like SourceHut.
Yeah, so supporting by mail could be an option in the future. Um, the two that I wanted to explore first was being able to push with a branch, um, but it wouldn't be like the fork workflow. You would add you would add the clone URL as a remote, and then push directly, and then it would like auto generate a branch for you.
Hmm.
This is a workflow that I discovered through Garrett, which I briefly had a slide for. Um, that's like a custom Git host that is used for a lot of Google infrastructure.
Okay.
Um, but given that deploying it is very tied to also Google infrastructure, it's not
Yeah.
um, widespread use.
They've got some great
But
ideas
I've heard a
locked
lot
up in
of
their
good
tools.
things about it. What's that?
They've got some great ideas locked up in their tools.
Yeah. Um, so I wanted to try exploring that. I also wanted to explore an idea of like um, being able to have like a REST endpoint
Okay.
that you could just post a patch file to,
Right.
and then it would give you the URL for that patch request.
Okay.
Um, and then that would make it really
Hmm.
easy to send little one-ups.
Okay. Well, it's not too terribly far off to go from there to an email endpoint. If you can do patches at all, you can get there. So it's an option long term. That's exciting. So patches are something that mostly have fallen out of favor. But I'm curious, what about patches do you like?
Um, I like that it's very native to Git,
Okay, yeah.
um, and I like that it also incentivizes like the small PR
Mm-hmm.
workflow, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, I think when you're contributing to a project, whether that's in a small team or like in a big public project, um, the bigger of a change that you want to make, creates an exponentially harder time to review for your
Mm-hmm.
coworkers. Um, and so um,
Well, there's like a. Go ahead.
incentivizing that, like being able to make many small changes over time. Um,
Okay.
and that's not like, you can have a single patch that affects many files, um, but that is still like a single kind of concrete
Okay.
change.
Well, there's like a transition period for projects. Like when you spin up a project initially, commits are going to be bigger and you get more frequent commits. Long term maintenance, smaller patches are really nice, right? When I start getting into like, well, maintenance and
Yeah.
bug fixing, ideally they're as small as possible so that you're able to kind of go, okay, I know what this code looks like, I know what this change is, and reviewing it doesn't take forever. It's nice to kind of support both so you can kind of
Right.
go through that code lifecycle.
Right. And I do still want to support that branch workflow. It just won't
Okay.
include forks.
Yeah. Well, and forks have always felt a little clunky on the
It will
GitHub
be,
side. Go fork the repo. Well, it's a mirror,
yeah.
sort of, that you have to keep up to date, sort of. And then make a branch and then do a weird cross merge thing. It's a bit of a mess. Um, Viewers asked about resources to looking into the Garrett approach. Are there other places that have tried other approaches? Do you know?
I'm not familiar with a ton. I've only seen it used on
Okay.
like Google projects. I've seen it used on like um, it's very easy to run into if you like follow Go development,
Okay.
like Go
Yeah.
the programming language. Um, and then I've also, just because this is something that's been on my mind for a long time, I've seen various people mention it online over the years.
Okay.
Um,
Fascinating. All right. Well, sweet. It has been awesome having you with us this month. Um,
yeah, thank you so much. It
give a
was
big
a
thanks
pleasure to be
to.
here.
Sorry. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I want to give a big thanks to Meghan for sharing WaffleGit. Um, and we will catch up again next month. I think we have another exciting one. I think I don't want to spoil too much, but I think it might be game engine related. So if you're a game dev and you're like, oh, I'd love to see some more of that going on, get excited. It should be good. Thank you so much for showing up. And yeah, again, good luck with that business. New businesses are very difficult. I've been doing some of that myself, and it's a process. Thank you so much for everybody showing up, and I'll see you next month.